Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. Thank you for joining us for Crack the Case interviewing workshop. My name is Christy Reynolds. I'm from the Office of Career Services. Many of you just saw me during PDP. So thanks for joining us today. We are lucky enough to have Mihir Mankad come to us to talk about case interviewing. He has great experience and is actually going to be a lecturer here October 22nd, Art of Communication, which is going to be a class here at Fletcher. So a little bit about him. He has a diverse background, and a lot of it including media, management consulting, nonprofit leadership. Most recently, he was a television news anchor with top channels in India. In addition, he's also hosted a lot of primetime news bulletins and covered the 2008 Olympics, 2010 Delhi Commonwealth Games, and the 2011 Cricket World Cup. Before that, he had a career spanning McKinsey, Bain, the Clinton Foundation, and has had experience with BCG as well, and has done case study and interview training internationally for about a decade. He holds a bachelor's degree in economics and psychology from Stanford, where he was a national champion tennis team member, an MBA from Kellogg, and a mid-year MPA as a Mason Fellow from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. So please help me in welcoming Mihir Mankad.
Good morning. After all of this, I'm still sweating when I see you guys. So again, my name is Mihir. I am thrilled to be part of the school this year. Can you hear me at the back? Can you hear me? And also, I'm very excited about going through this workshop today. It was very helpful when I was back in business school. And there's going to be no magic. It's going to be an hour and a half with you guys. But one of the things I hope to instill in you and those who are serious about consulting is just after this to go out and practice, practice, practice. The average person who's been successful in one of the 3 strategy consulting firms has done at least 50 case interviews. So, doing a couple will not help. But just if you can be inspired to go out and just practice. But this hopefully will give you a structure of how to practice, and I feel we would have succeeded today. Okay, so I have about an hour and 10 minutes or so with you guys. And this is the rough structure. Just want to talk a couple of slides on just consulting. I want to go with the lowest common denominator that some of you know it very well, but some of you have just heard the term. We'll just quickly touch on an introduction. Fit interview. Now, there's only 5 minutes here, and there's 50 minutes for case interviews. I strongly believe that they're both as important. And we're not going to touch on them in as much detail this time, not because fit interview is not important, but there's a lot of other resources that you can practice your fit interviews. But I do want to touch on the 5 most commonly asked fit interview questions. Okay? Then we'll go through the cases and a Q&A at the end. All right? Okay, so the mindset. This is really important. I think, especially in business school, there's a lot of people who come in saying, I've come to business school and I have to get the job with McKinsey. And just like performance in any sport, your most optimal point is when you're most calm and relaxed. Anything that puts more pressure than that will make you suboptimal. So the challenge here is that you practice 50 cases, and then you walk into that interview with BCG, and you start getting nervous. You're limiting yourself. So this is something that you want to practice. Just by doing these 40, 50 interviews, you'll get into a groove where you can do this. It becomes a natural part of yourself. And you take a healthy perspective to this. Usually, there's about 5 to 10% offer rate of interviews for consulting firms. And you just go in there knowing that this is part of the process. You'll get through, and at times you will get dings. But you can control the controllables. Yeah? And the third point here is that please keep in mind that you're not competing with one another. You're competing with MBAs from other school, other grad students. So to the extent that you can get a collaborative culture where you can form your own teams and share listening and practicing, that will be very helpful. Yeah? Realistic expectations and finding a way to be calm and relaxed. Now, one thing I really loved about Fletcher that I discovered last year was your Tumblr website. What should a bar call me? So I've actually borrowed some of your GIFs. And this is the point that if you want something so badly that you take it so seriously that you're not able to perform, please keep that in perspective too. All right? OK, so what is consulting? Just one quick slide on it, right? What is this about? OK, there's a few buzzwords in consulting. I've just listed 10 points, not 10 words, or 10 phrases that really capture what this industry is about. What is the first word that comes to mind about what is consulting? When you think about consulting, what's the first word that comes to mind? Do you have a thought? Problem solving. Wow. There we go. Problem solving. This is good. OK. Can you tell us more?
Well, the role of the consultant is to come in and serve a very complicated problem for a client. So they might not know how to approach it.
Mm-hmm.
The consultant's role is to come in, figure out the structure, and follow the process to deliver an answer at the end of the engagement.
OK. So as said, a lot of times people say, they say, why do you want to do consulting? So I enjoyed the game of chess. I enjoy solving problems. Inherently in all of the exercises and all the projects that you do, there's an element of solving a problem. And that's the centerpiece of consulting, right? Performance improvement. Even if you're cost cutting, you're improving profits, this is another phrase that is very symbolic with consulting. Any more guesses? What'd you guess? Market entry. Market entry would be strategy. Now, consulting firms can be strategy firms. They can be operations improvement firms. They can also be nonprofit management firms, right? So strategy, and you mentioned market entry, we'll come to that fairly soon. That is a type of a case. But let's take a look at this word client, right? The thing is, when you go through an interview, right, these words have to come out naturally so that you understand the industry, right? Consulting is very much about a client project and about projects, studies, or cases. These are three words used by Bain, BCG, or McKinsey to mean the same thing, implying a short-term project when you're working with a client, usually between 3 to 6 months, and that has a finite goal, and where you'll be working with a team. Okay? Any other guesses? What's missing? We have 5 more. What's something that not a negative, but something that you associate with consulting in terms of lifestyle? Travel. Yes. What else? Overtime. There is no concept of overtime. Yeah. It's on average, the working hours are about 50 to 60 hours a week, closer to 50 these days. Travel is a good one. What else? Money. Thank you for being honest. Money, I haven't put that on here, and this is not something that should come up in an interview. But, OK, frameworks. I'm coming to travel, but frameworks, right? What is a framework? What is a framework?
Could be a framework of your process, could be a framework of your deliverable, could be a framework of your client engagement.
So a framework is?
It's a set of rules or rules of engagement with a client.
Sure. Well, sure. It's basically a heuristic. The BCG matrix or the 5 forces. It's a heuristic to help solve a problem, right? And there's a lot of frameworks in consulting. We'll touch on the 5 most common frameworks used in the industry in a bit. Decks. Your world will be around decks, PowerPoint decks, okay, especially your first couple of years, and you have to accept that. A lot of times there's a lot of glamour associated with the industry early that, I'll be working with the CEO to solve a major issue. You got to earn your right to have those meetings. So your world, what you're actually doing most of the time on your computer, is you're thinking strategically, you're problem solving, but you're putting it on a deck just like this. Right? PowerPoint and to some extent Excel have to be your 2 best friends. Right? I just want to give you a very realistic view of the industry. It's a very popular industry for good reasons. A lot of people want to work in consulting, and the pay is great. The exposure is great. I think it's a great job for a couple of years for everyone. After that, it depends on what your interests are, but I want you to have a very realistic perspective, which will also help in the interview. Deliverables and deadlines. Okay. Very set deadlines, not unlike school, but deliverable is taken very seriously in consulting. Travel, thank you. And what's the last guess? This is what was that game show in the US a few years ago where you try to guess the last answer, Family Feud? Okay, what do you think is the last one here? Sorry? Versatility, yeah, that's a good point. Probably should be here. That's an expectation of what a consultant should be. Very rarely do you get to specialize in an industry early. Any other guesses? Objectivity, right? So objectivity, linear logical problem solving, kind of keeping an eye on data. Show it's data-driven. That's another good idea here. I will just put number 10, pressure, right? Now, at one point in my life, I got into consulting 3 times. At one point in my life, I said, I know I don't want to do this as a career. Can I ease up, a little bit to do a few other things in life, play more sports, enjoy, dancing, whatever it is, and can I just ease up a little bit? And it was very hard, right? You don't see it directly, but implicitly the bar is high for performance, and it comes with a lot of pressure. Some people enjoy it. For some people, it's something to think about, okay? And that there is, whether firms say it or not, there is an up or out policy implicitly in consulting firms. So I think this is a very realistic picture of what the industry is like, and I think you need to seriously consider that. Any thoughts, questions? Okay. Interview types, right? Fit interviews, case interviews. Just 5 minutes on fit interviews. Now, I've been fortunate to be on both sides of the table, and there are literally 5 categories of fit questions that are covered by most consulting firms, right? 5 categories. Again, a framework maybe. But what do you think is the number one question? By the way, how many of you have gone through consulting interviews for a summer or have done this before? Excellent. So it's about 10% of the group here. All right. And did you do it over the summer? Did you all do it over the summer prior to coming here? Okay. Excellent. Top 5 fit questions. The first time that you were in an interview, what did the interviewer ask you, the first question? It's a rhetorical question sometimes. What was the first question? Why consulting? Why us? Okay. Why McKinsey? Well, because you're McKinsey, But you still have to prepare an answer to that question, right? Why us? Why consulting? Why this firm? Why this office? And everyone's applied to these firms, but also this is the first opportunity for you to distinguish yourself, to make an impression of your personality. Think about this question, right? Why us? What is the opposite of why us? Not why not us. What else? What else is, yes? What do you not like? What do you not like? Not yet. Not yet, yeah? Why you? Thank you. Why you? Walk me through your resume. Whatever you put on your resume, there should be a good story around it. Every line item should have a solid story around it. Tell me about a specific experience on your resume. Walk me through your professional highlights. Right? Third category of questions. It has 2 sides. What are your dash and dash? Strengths and weaknesses, right? Think of 3 weaknesses, 3 strengths. My impatience around my teammates who are not as efficient as me is not a weakness, right? When you're going through weakness, what are two things that interviewers are looking for? Two things. Yeah, please. Honesty, thank you. Whether you're an honest person, you're choosing to reveal a weakness, right? It's assumed that you'll choose something. You don't have to really give a weakness that could be a hindrance on the job, but when you choose a weakness, are you an honest person? What is the second thing that you're looking for? Self-awareness, introspection, excellent. I'm really enjoying this. Guys, very good, yes. Honesty and introspection. Think about weaknesses that bring both these points out. For some people, strengths are harder to list to because you're a humble person. But think about them. You know, this is a large group, so ideally when I've done this coaching, I don't want to spend more time on it, but what I love doing is if there's a volunteer and I say, you know, tell me your top strengths, and you will stand up and you will say, my strengths are my ability to work with data and, you know, get along with people, and you know, my leadership abilities. And then I will go to someone else for something, and I'll come right back to you. Say, tell me your strengths. This time you'll say, my strengths are my teamwork, leadership ability, data analytics. I'll go to someone else, come back to you for the third time. And the third time or the fourth time you answer that question, it'll be significantly better. My point being, why do you want to make your interview, you know, your trial? If you're going to be spending 5,000 hours in management consulting over 2 years, why not take 50 to just go through these things, write them down, I almost suggest these 5 questions, write down the answers so that you've done them 7, 8 times, 10 times, you know, until the moment comes around, right? What are your strengths and weaknesses? Any other guesses for number 4? Give me an example of a time when, right? It's great that you say you're a team player and that you're a leader. Give me an anecdote when you led a team, right? You worked with a lot of data, right? You faced an ethical dilemma. Think about these things, write them down. They are there in each of your experiences. But do you want to really be thinking on the spot when there's a lot of pressure? You will have to do a lot of it for your cases anyways. But think of examples. Don't just say that I am, but think of these examples. And the last question that interviewers will always ask you, who else raised their hand about doing consulting in the summer back there? There's someone back there who did consulting? Did you do consulting? What's the very last question people ask you right before you're about to leave?
Well, it was a good question, but one I think is sort of what do you see yourself doing down the road, and why consulting now, and what do you see yourself doing?
Long-term, you know, career aspirations, right? That generally comes in later rounds, but yeah, it's definitely one of the frequent questions. But at the very end, when they've asked all your questions, they're saying, about to say thank you. What is the last thing that they say? Thank you. Any questions for me? Right? Can I answer anything else? Do you have any last questions for me? And for this question, my suggestion, there's no right answer here, right? It's just a suggestion. My suggestion is don't ask something that you could have researched yourself. Ask something related to the personal experience, not a personal question, but a personal experience related to that person's track. That's just my suggestion. There's a whole bunch of other things that you can ask, but this is something that I've done and I've really enjoyed. It's a real conversation. You know, you were in my position 5 years ago. How has this worked out? You know, what do you feel are the strong points about this industry? What advice would you have for someone starting out? Anything related to their experience, right? This is just a few at the top of my head, but think about something that you want to ask them that you couldn't have easily researched outside. Okay? These 5 questions, if you prepare them, if there's a document that you have and you answered these questions, you practiced it for a few times, you'll do fairly well in fit interviews. Okay? Any questions? You have any questions for me? No? Okay, let's get into the meat of things. The case interview, right? What is a case interview? What is a case interview? It is a snapshot. Remember, it's a snapshot of a consulting assignment. When I compare the cases that I worked on in my interviews, and I compared them to the actual projects, they didn't really compare because you're trying to simulate an environment and ascertain the candidate's strengths and analytical skills in a short amount of time. But they are based on real cases, but there's some specific features to them that make them unique, right? This is the way it works. The interviewer simulates the communication between a client and a consultant. You have a background. You have to sort through the key issues. You have to structure the problem, and then provide a logical approach to solving the problem. Now here, again, it is all about content and delivery, right? A lot of times people are focused, let me just go through, Costantino's book, let me just go through, churn through cases. It's like GMAT, let's go through vocabulary, let's just go through lots of words. But it's about delivery too. When there's 100 applicants and they have to take 3 or 4, there'll be about 30 or 40 who would have solved the case, and then what differentiates the other 40, right? And one of the things, I've touched on it, this you'll see as a theme, is find a way to enjoy the process, right? It's not about you going out and some person in a suit judging you. It's about having a conversation with someone. And because I did this 3 times, I think that part of not wanting it so bad and really going in, making eye contact, wanting to get to know you, also in the interview, just brings out a natural side of yourself. Okay? This can last anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, and you can do it. All right, this is also from your wonderful Tumblr site. So why case interviews? Again, it provides the interviewer with your snapshot reaction of the assignment. Now, of course, there are smooth talkers who are not necessarily great workers. To survive anything more than a couple of assignments, you really should have it in your DNA to also work hard. A lot of consulting, those brainstorming sessions when you actually work in there are just few moments far in between. The rest of the time, you're actually grinding away, doing the work. But still, the case interview favors people who speak and communicate well. But again, it's a snapshot reaction of a simulated consulting environment, and it provides the interviewer insights in all of these skills. And don't think about this conscientiously, but if you think at the end of the interview, there's generally a checkbox for some consulting firms where all of these things have to be checked, right? At the end, you need to survive. Yes, okay.
Just on the data/quant point, how often does math come up?
Math is represented disproportionately. So you will see some of the cases that I'm going to go through, they are going to be math heavy. And just by the time, remember, to get a job, you would generally meet at least 5 or 6 people, sometimes over 10 people. And math will inevitably be a part of a couple of interviews, at least, if not most of the case interviews. In 10 or 12 interviews, you'll do about 4 or 5 that are fit, and about 60% will be cases. But math is important. Knowing formulas and certain theorems is not important, but the ability to calculate numbers on the spot. And I've made a case specifically for Fletcher. That is, I'm really excited to go through that with you, but you'll see what I mean. That's why I always say get a good night's sleep. Get a good night's sleep before a case study. There's no way you will go through the gamut of things that could be asked. But if you've gotten through this practice and you get your sleep, you'll be able to do mental exercises, including math exercises, right? I'll just breeze through this. This is just the approach to cases. You will have access to this deck, so you don't really need to take notes. There's basically 4 stages. In the first stage, which I think most of you know, spend some time to clarify the question. When you hear the question, sometimes the thought is, okay, let me just jot some notes and start, let's get going on it. But take some time to listen. It's always good to take a few seconds to just have silence and absorb it, try to make a mental picture in your mind, and clarify the issue. Because a lot of times what you think they're asking may be different from what they really want. So clarify it, right? Structure. When you start thinking, think about your problem, structure it, and structure it out loud. Structure the problem. And then start to analyze. Every case study has an analysis portion, right? And then conclude. A lot of times in decks, also this is the same, it's called an answer first strategy, where you clarify, but you give it a hypothesis right at the beginning. Then you structure, then you analyze, and then you conclude again. You can choose to have what is called an answer first hypothesis or a bottoms up approach. Okay? But whatever your approach, think it out aloud, because that's all the interviewer has to evaluate you. They really, even if you hand over some notes, they're not going to be looking at that or remembering it. Okay. And then when you've done all of this, there's nothing you can do. Just wait. You've thrown out all your cards. I remember in college there was an interview that I was really excited for. I thought I'd worked hard on it, did well in it, and just didn't get a call back. And I actually emailed my interviewer, and the interviewer actually offered to give time for feedback, which, I think if you actually if you send an email, there's a chance that they will, but a lot of times they don't. So I had a chance to talk to my interviewer. And I said, I think, what went wrong? I felt things, I really enjoyed this interview. I was very excited about your firm. And he didn't really have specific feedback. He said, you know what? You're right. Things went well, but eventually I interviewed 12 people that day, and I had to pass on 2. And I really appreciated that candor. He said, I could tell you a few things that you did wrong, and obviously there were, but I was satisfied with your case. I just had to make a decision about taking 2 people. And that really brought things home. I think we tend to think of it from our perspective, but just in terms of the numbers, people make decisions. You can control the controllables. You cannot control beyond that. Right? Okay, 6 case categories. What would be the most common category of case questions that you will see? What's the category of case questions? Profitability. Thank you. Profitability, very common. Market sizing, industry analysis, investment, operations, and brain teasers or oddballs. How many gas stations are there in the United States? How many individuals have played tennis on the courts outside Fletcher in the past year? Yeah. Now, you could argue there's more buckets, but usually most case questions fit in these 6 categories. And if you're planning your strategy, you want to try and touch on each of these categories. They're roughly in order of frequency, although brain teasers have become much more common these days. Okay. Do not mean to get technical, but these have categories. Right. Now let's do our first mini simulation. This is not a full case, but a framework that I really want you to get. Okay, profitability. If someone says, client is a consumer products company, profits have been declining, or recently working for a clothing manufacturer, unit profit margins have remained at historical levels, but overall company profits are declining. My client's profits are declining. Okay, that's what that means. How would you go about this? Profit. What is profit? X minus Y. Thank you. Revenues minus costs. Now, some of these frameworks that I'm going to show, it's the way I think about it, and it's generally the way a lot of people break it down. You don't have to break it down this way, but I'm just showing you typically how it's done, right? Profits are revenues minus costs. Revenues, what is the definition of revenues or sales? Revenues equals X times Y. Someone else? Sorry? Thank you. Price times quantity. And costs can generally be broken down into fixed costs and variable costs. Okay? One more level, right? Price and quantity. Now you can start looking at frameworks. 4 Ps, 4 Cs, 5 forces. I will come to that. But before that, let's touch on costs, right? What is a fixed cost? Definition of a fixed cost. You know, all the answers back there, huh? What is the definition of a fixed cost? Yeah?
Cost is going to stay level no matter, it's just the cost is going to stay level.
No matter what?
No matter what your sales or,
How much you produce,
yeah.
right? Okay, so this is costs like rent, electricity, that technically, yeah, if you produce a lot, you might need like bigger premises, but you can't allocate them to each additional unit sold. Fixed costs, overhead. You have salaries for your management. After a certain point, you'll need more management, but they don't really fluctuate with each additional unit that you produce. Variable costs, which are typically labor and materials, right? It's mainly labor and materials there. Those are costs that for every product, so if you're making widgets or if you're making this remote control, the material and the actual labor to assemble this remote is a variable cost. And if you can just get up to this point right here, it's something that the interviewer can check off. Okay, this person understands business, right? Simple, break profits, revenues, costs, price times quantity, fixed costs, variable costs, right? And when you start looking at the costs, if you can list all of this out, there's fixed labor, and there's variable labor. There's materials that generally are part of variable costs. If you can lay this out, you won 80 to 90% of that battle. And then what the interviewer will generally do is take you along one path. So say, they'll give you hints that, variable costs are fine. Saying, okay, then let's take a look at fix. Listen for these hints, right? Because they want to take you down a certain path. Or they might tell you, costs haven't been changing significantly, and the industry hasn't seen any change in the past year. What else would you look at? Go up to revenues. Okay? For revenues, what is the 5 forces framework? Porter's 5 forces. Okay, let's get through that. I have a slide on that. The 4 Ps of marketing. What are the 4 Ps of marketing? Price, product, promotion, and placement. Okay, it will be there in a later slide. I'm going to give you some business jargon and some concepts, but no more than what you need. I mean, you can take a finance course, and I'm going to touch on a couple of things, but try and give you the things only at a high level where you should be able to get by in a case, because going through like a whole business session is not feasible, right? But knowing profits and up to this extent is something that is expected for anyone that wants to work in this industry, right? 4 Ps, product, price, placement, and promotion, is generally a framework used for marketing when you try to introduce a new product or if you're trying to analyze the performance of that product. The 4 Cs, cost, competitors, collaborators, and company, another framework for industry analysis. And let's go through the slide that has that. But this would be one way of laying out the problem. Right? Any questions? Okay. Here are the frameworks, and there's many more. Okay. These are 5, BCG matrix, 4 commonly used frameworks. But please don't say in the interview, when you get a question, all right, I'm going to use a McKinsey 7S framework, even though you are, right? try and lay it out as points. But keep these in mind. And if you go to Wikipedia for each of these in about 20 minutes or 20 to 30 minutes, you'll get an overview of what it is. I don't want to spend too much time going into them in detail. 5 forces is just a framework that's used for industry analysis. When you want to get into a new industry, what are the forces that you need to think about? New entrants, buyers, suppliers, substitutes, and competitors. 4 P's of marketing. When you want to market a product, you can generally go through all of these 4 categories. SWOT analysis is used when you're trying to understand the strengths and weaknesses of a company or an industry. And the 7S framework is used to understand how an organization is performing. So its structure, its systems, its shared value style. But I would rather that we go through this in more detail by yourselves, or if you can find a work partner or a team to go through these and share some of the thinking and the concepts, that might be helpful. Okay, market sizing, another category of cases. How many gas stations are in the US? How many massages were given in the Midwest? Shouldn't be widest. In the Midwest per year. What is the dollar value of the Bluetooth headset market? How do you start thinking about these? Market sizing. How many individuals played tennis on the courts at Fletcher in the past year? How many?
Well, to start, I would just realize there's no right answer to it. I know that I'm looking for those 1,000. I would just start with the base, start small and work up. So, all right, I know that there was 5 games every night usually, and I just multiply it out. If there's 5 games, that's 2, that's 10 per night, and then how many a week, a month, and just multiply it from there.
Yeah, you've laid out a really good framework starting from the bottom up. So you can say, how many courts are there, outside? 10 courts. Typically, there's certain working hours for the courts. So no one would play at nights. You have a total number of hours. Then you calculate an average of number of players that might play a certain hour, right? There's peak periods and then slow periods. So you assume a percentage utilization of the courts in different periods. And then all this while, though, you've got to be able to calculate in your mind the numbers that you're talking about. You can use round numbers, to the extent possible, but you lay out the framework and then you calculate and keep in mind all the components because eventually you'll have to add it up. Okay? This is one of my favorite cases. How many car tires are there in the US? And we will do this exercise right now. Okay, let's just try to solve this case. How many car tires are there in the US of A? How many car tires? Anyone would like to start us off, please? Thank you.
We'll start with the population of US.
And if you're at the back, can you please speak as loud as possible, or wherever you are, just a little louder?
So we'll start with the population of US. Then we'll take a split of income distribution per household. Then we'll assume average, number of cars per household, and eventually we'll multiply it by 4 or 5, which is tires.
Wonderful. Okay, you said some really good things, okay? You said start with the population, but then you said let's take households.
Family size per
Right. So the population of the US is about 320 million people, right? And you know that there's about 120 million households. Excellent to start with people, then say how many people per household. But eventually you came to households. So let's just start with households. Let's say there's 120 million households in the US, right? You mentioned another number, right? You said average of a car per household, right? And then you said 4 or 5. Why did you use those numbers?
There are 5 tires per
5 tires, right? Usually a vehicle will have a spare tire. This is your first point. Okay, yeah, car, 4 tires per car. Did you catch the fact that there's a 5th tire, right? So, what is that number roughly? Just lay out the 3 components, 120 million times 1 car per household. 1 car per household on a into 5 is 600 million, right? That's the level of math that you need to be able to do in your head, right? Round numbers. If it was 138 times 17.4, yeah, you know, that you can pull out a calculator or take a guess, but 600 million people, or 600 million car tires in the US, is that the answer? Okay, it's not the answer, but it's part of the answer, right? Excellent first line. What else? Yeah, back.
A lot of cars have winter and summer tires because they're in regions that have a lot of snow. So they probably have another set of tires laying around somewhere, at least one set.
Sure. Let's assume, though, I mean, there's a few really cold regions of the country, and then some people don't have cars. Let's just assume that this covers households well. Okay? 600 million tires are in cars of all households in the United States. What else are we missing? Look at the question. And let's go with someone new back there in the green, please. Sorry? Yes. Correct. Oh, wait, one. Okay, you said 2 really good things. What is the last statement you just made? No, after that, what is the very last statement? Something about not on cars? Yes. So there's a lot of tires that are not on cars, right? And you said something about showrooms, right? These are cars that people have not already bought, right? What else? You talked about residential households. Yes, at the back there? Yeah, it's right in the black.
I was thinking about businesses.
Yes. Businesses will also have cars. Great point. One more thing closely related to that.
My question is, you never mentioned if this tires own cars already, or like Goodyear's, or businesses sell tires, like Walmart.
How many car tires are in the US? So all of the above. All of the above, right? First level answer would be four tires, 100 million households, 400 million, tires. No. On cars, off cars, businesses. What about fleets? Who said that? Yes, governments, fleets. Taxis. Yep. Yep, exactly.
You also have a whole bunch of tires no longer in use.
Thank you. Wow, as a team, we're doing really well. Let's lay this out, yeah? So line by line, all right? First half, number of tires on cars, not on cars, okay? If you can get to this level of refinement at the very beginning, huge bonus points, right? How would that happen? Taking 30 seconds to a minute to really think about this, right? It's okay to take a minute. Can I have a minute to gather my thoughts? Perfectly fine. Silence is good. Yeah? Okay, how many cars? There's cars, wait. How many car tires in the US? Next level, private, unsold, and public. All right? Private is what we talked about. There's also 10% of these tires that are unsold. You have to assume a certain inventory, right? As you said, with dealers, right? And then there's public. So there's fleets like taxis, rental cars, limos. These are businesses around vehicles, right? And then there's the government. 100 million cars in the US are used by the government. 100 million. Cars, vehicles, whatever, trucks, vans. And then not on cars, right? What's not on cars? Another guess as to how we would break this down? Landfills, yeah? Dumps, basically, right? So you mean in inventory and in supply chain. So we'll just assume that that was the unsold portion here, right? Right? But let's say new and used. So at the manufacturer, you're right, at the manufacturer and in shops, right? And then in dumps and alternate uses, 500 million tires. Not that you're expected to know that, but if you had just laid this out, I mean, this is an A+ case. Anything around here would be between an A and an A-. You're not really expected to get to these numbers. But this is how rich a case analysis can be. And then unfortunately, there's always that person that, someone will come to this level. And it doesn't matter if you hadn't, but if you had shown the ability to really listen to the question, break the problem into its constituent parts, and push your own thinking, right, in terms of how you can solve this problem, I think you would have succeeded in this case interview. Yeah? Okay, so I'm going to go through, there's going to be a slide of just some demographic and basic statistics that you should know. Okay, if you don't know roughly that there's about 300 million people in the US, or there's about 7 billion people in the world, from the Fletcher School of International Diplomacy and Law, it's not a good sign. But if you were off in terms of the number of tires that are at manufacturers or that are in dumps, but if you had a rationale for why you picked that number, that is fine. Rarely will you, very rarely will even this be a factor, how close you were to this number of 1.36 billion. I don't even know if that's the accurate number, but I know few of these components were accurate a few years ago. But no matter how far you were, it's what is your logic? What is your rationale? Can you back that up? Right? That's what case studies are about. Right? Any questions here? Yeah.
Did you solve independently for taxing in rental, or did you take an estimation on private and public?
So this is a good question because it touches on this. To what detail do you want to go into, right? And this is a judgment call. If you know you're in a 40-minute interview, and the interviewer has taken 5 to 10 minutes to go through your introduction, and there's 20 minutes, and you arrived here in 15 minutes, then you don't necessarily want to break this down. And again, it's a judgment call. Yes, we can actually go through each of these specific components, but to what extent do you feel your idea was communicated, the fact that you understand this? And if you have just broken it out right here, it shows that you can think about this problem in the right way. Okay, let's move on. This is a case that I have made specifically for Fletcher. It's global. Whether you worked in the heavy manufacturing industry and had exposure to the consumer product space or not, we all use the internet. We all use Facebook. All right? An interviewer can come to you and say, estimate the total number of global internet users. Let's assume that we are in mid-2012. 2000 and 2012, and comment on the growth and drivers by region as in continents. Same thing for Facebook. Okay? Let's walk through this. It's a real table. This is the way the regions are broken out. About 7 billion people in the world. Keep in mind, Middle East is separate from Asia. Okay? Oops. How would you start this? If you were to first just guess the world population broken out by region. This is a combination of what you've been exposed to in life. This is your field. It's, international affairs, population of the world broken out by region. How would you start? How would you break the 7 billion number down? Okay, so let's start with North America. Just a couple of countries in North America, right? What is the population of North America? 500 million. Any other guesses? 750 million in North America. Wow, 750 million. Any other guesses? Less than 400. It is less than 400 million. US is 320 million, the Canada, and again in 2012, another 25, 30 million. Okay, so about 350 million for North America. What is the population of Africa? How many people live in Africa? 700 million people. This is broken out. Mexico is actually added to South America in this table. This was actually from Internet World Stats. Okay? So it's in Latin and South America, right? Latin America and Caribbean. Okay? So 350 million people in North America. How many in Africa? A billion. Yes, a billion people in Africa. How many in Asia, less the Middle East? How many people in China? How many people in India? 2.5 billion in India and China alone, right? Plus Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, Korea. Okay. So a billion, what we've got so far, a billion in Africa. That was a good guess. But keep in mind, there's more people living in India or China than all of Africa. Okay? Billion people in Africa, 350 million in North America. How many for all of the rest of the Americas? How many people in the American continent other than Canada and the US? 560 or 70 million. Okay? Right? Australia, how many? 25. Oceania, another 10. This is your answer right now. Breakup of population across the world. Okay? And you want to use your best. The point of this question is, okay, I know there's about 300 million people in the US. If it's US and Canada, how many more? If I'm calculating Asia, I know 2.4 billion are between India and China, right? So just use, now these are numbers, right? But you're breaking down this number and you're using your best life experience and logic to come up with these numbers. Next question, what is the internet penetration that you would guess by the region? So what would you guess? What is it in North America? Okay, I'm going to give you the bottom line here. 34% of the world's population has access to the internet. What is it in North America? 95% in North America. 80%, that's actually very close to the answer. 78%. If the interviewer tells you that 80% is the highest and it's in North America, what would you guess for Africa or Asia? Less than 20%, 4%, 5%, right? I'm just saying your numbers out aloud, okay? How about the Middle East? Think about what's happening in the Middle East last few years, right? Yeah.
I have a question. Why would you assume that it would be like less than 5% in Asia when 4 billion people live in Asia and the average penetration is 34%? There you'd have to have like 15 million people.
Right. No, I didn't give you the answer. I was repeating some of the numbers because you can't hear. I'm repeating what people are saying. And then what you say, you've got to be able to back up. So if you made that statement, you take a number, put a stake on the ground, and then you back it up with this rationale. The ability to back up a wrong number, okay, with a logical argument is better than no statement, okay, unless it's way off, right? Let's take a look. If the bottom line is provided, internet penetration is about 80% in North America, but only 15% in Africa. Okay? And whether you said it's 20% or 30% or 35% is okay. The fact that it's significantly less than North America is the point to have been made here. And the fact that Europe should be very close to North America. Okay? That closer to North America than to Africa or Asia. Okay? Now, this is another question. If you knew that there were 2.4 billion people and about a 34% penetration rate for the internet in 2012, what do you think it was in 2000? And how would you even start thinking about it? What is the penetration in 2000? Think about what was going on in 2000, how nascent, how advanced was the technology space. What is your best guess of how many internet users in 2000, 12 years ago, and how would you, is there a formula that you could think about to get to that number?
You need to first think about the population growth between 2000 and today, so I'd knock it back to 6 billion, with not even low
Sure.
population. Then
But Correct.
schools there were no Wi-Fi cafes, stuff like that going on, except for perhaps in the most highly technological places in the world. So you have to really scale back where you are and then stick to the most developed places.
Now, what you did there is exactly what you should do in an interview. Lay out your thoughts. There might be 25 other factors, but you made 2 or 3 points, and you laid out why you believe what you believe, right? One formula, okay, if not expected to get to this, but if you had thought of a formula, would be to assume a certain growth rate per year. Over 12 years, what is an average growth rate that you would think that the internet grew by? Per year. No, per year. Yeah, it's exponential, but per year, what would it be? 15%? 15%, 70, the right answer is 17%. But you would have said 20%. Does that make sense? You can't assume because it's exponential. So yeah, internet is growing, but a 15 to 20% annual growth rate actually compounds a lot. So if you had assumed 15%, and there is I shouldn't say a simple formula, but there is a formula where you compound something or you divide, that the numerator by 1.15 raised to 12. Actually, if you do 1.17 raised to 12, you'll get an answer very close to that. 360 million people. Okay? 360 went to 2.4 billion. Doesn't look like a 15% growth rate, but compounded it is. If you had that formula, if you had this number and you knew that it was about a 15% growth rate, you could have gotten to the 2.4 billion number. Okay? This is a little bit on the harder side of a case question, but I want to illustrate this. I mean, you won't be asked something with all these complexities, but it's just an illustration. And to answer your question about math again, if you had to do a mental calculation where you actually said, okay, look at the internet users' latest data. If you had to take these numbers and divide it by this number, roughly, you can do some quick thing. This should be about 10%, right? This should be something around 30% or 35%, right? If you were to just do mental calculations, how close would you be to these numbers? This is just an exercise for you. Because you laid out all these formulas of percentage penetration, but can you fill out the last column in terms of numbers? Yeah? And now this is a table for the internet. Very quickly, what about Facebook? If you know that in 2012, 50% of North Americans were active on Facebook. And, 50% of North America was active on Facebook. Let me ask you a question. What do you think would happen in the case of Africa? You know in Africa, the internet has come slowly, right? And only a few people have access to internet. Would you guess that those people who have access to internet, the few of them, have greater than proportional access to Facebook? Or do they have lesser than proportional access to Facebook, and why? Or not access, they choose to be on Facebook, and why? Anyone from the back there, any guesses? No? Yes, please? Yes. Yes, and what does that mean? They would have proportionately more access on Facebook. That's what I thought too, right? What else is a feature about Facebook in Africa? Think about all the countries, right? Facebook is not as accessible in many of the African languages as it is for the European languages, right? So if you actually take a look at the real numbers, Africa has a 3.9% penetration of Facebook relative to its 15% penetration for internet. Okay? And can you list these drivers? Why? If you compare both of these, take a look at Africa, 15.6 and 3.9, and the US, 80% internet, but 50% Facebook. Why? Broadband penetration, language, right? Age structure. This age structure is just one of the factors. and availability of devices, the fact that people access the internet in Africa mainly on their mobile does not make it a very fun experience for Facebook, especially if it's not translated in that many languages. Could you have thought of this earlier? Maybe, maybe not. But could you have listed out these factors? Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Absolutely. That culture should have been here. Thank you. Right? Cultural factors. Can you lay out the factors? This is what consulting case interviews are about, right? Laying out these factors. Why are you thinking the way you are? Well, if a continent has had internet recently, and it's only a privileged few that have access to internet, well, they should all have Facebook, right? But they don't, because, right? Okay. Just now I'm going to breeze through a little more. Industry analysis, sample questions. You will have access to the deck. Take a look at some of these sample questions that are there for industry analysis. Basically, we're thinking of a new space. Our client is thinking about entering a new industry. How would you analyze the factors of this industry? Right? Laid out a framework here. This is one framework. And it doesn't directly just draw from the 5 forces and throw it there. These could be different categories of analyses that you could go down. Take a look. It's a starting point for you. Yeah? Market entry or expansion. One of your clients has come, and wants to enter the market for ergonomic. This is actually a subcategory of industry analysis, but it can be phrased like a market entry or expansion case. Okay? Slightly different criteria if it's market entry, expansion. Investment cases. Now, you're not expected to know finance, right? But the concept of should we invest in a specific venture or company has some logic and strategy to it, but it also has some quantitative analysis, some elementary understanding of finance. And what is that, right? The ability to estimate the future profits. Actually, technically it's cash flow. But if you're investing in something, what is the future cash that is expected from this investment, right? What is the right discount rate? Okay, this whole finance classes on how to calculate what is a discount. It's not just the rate of inflation that you bring down. A discount rate implies the risk in that venture, right? And how do you associate a certain risk with a specific venture? What is your rationale for it? That's what you need to think about. Given the discount rate and the future cash flows, what is the net present value? If you can put something about the present value. We're looking at money coming in the future. What is its present value with the right discount rates? Yeah. And are there other synergies? What is a synergy? What is the definition of a synergy? Yeah. Yeah, so 1 plus 1 is 2.5, right? If Coke merges with Pepsi, could they have certain savings in terms of cost? That's never going to happen. But it's just, why would two entities add up to more than the individual parts? Generally, you want to acquire another company because you can do something better with it than two entities by themselves. Okay? This level of business thinking, logic, is expected. After all, you want to work in a space that is generally about business and management, right? And even if you work for a nonprofit consulting firm, this is an important element of finance that you should have at least a rough grasp on. Investment cases. Now, if you've not taken a financial accounting course, that's the way it is. But just keep in mind that there are 3 key financial statements: the balance sheet, the income statement, and the cash flow statement. Right? Each of these 3 tell you different things. in a nutshell, if you had to have a one-line answer, right? A balance sheet tells you everything on the one hand that you own or is a source of future value to you. Land, buildings, cash, things of value to you in the future. And on the other side, it balances it with things that you owe to people, liabilities, loan, debt. And whatever is the difference, it's what is called net equity. So balance sheet is assets is equal to liabilities plus net equity. Going through this fast, but just giving you a one-liner on it. So balance sheet is a snapshot of an organization's future on a particular day. Right? An income statement is if you were to start an ice cream truck, on Sundays, like sell ice cream. Whatever comes in terms in your cash kitty is your revenues. Whatever goes out that you pay to buy the ice cream is expenses, right? And there's direct expenses and indirect expenses. So if you need to have electricity and so forth, that's indirect. Your income statement over a period of time shows you how much money came in, how much went out, and what are your profits for that period of time. And a cash flow statement is required because in large organizations, when you deliver a service, does not match with when cash actually comes in or out. So it's supposed to reconcile the income statement with actual cash coming in and out so you know how much cash is on hand. These are the three most important financial statements. It is possible towards the end that someone might lay out an income statement for you. And when you see these line items, at least you should recognize them at a very high level. Okay? 3 common financial statements. Deracio, well familiar with these, right? Okay. Operations cases. Need to cut costs. This is my fourth and last case study that I'll go through quickly with you. Need to cut costs. You need to think about how to rationalize a product line. You need to think about a process. You need to add operational efficiency at a manufacturing plant. How would you think about this? Right? Here's our case. The last one for today. The CEO of a large conglomerate has asked you to do a comprehensive review of his pharmaceutical subsidiary. Right? You have a month at the client side to gather the most pertinent data and to make some preliminary recommendations. You go to the client site and you want to prioritize your data needs. So you've been given this product line. Okay? 6 products that the client is currently offering. Wants to get an idea of what could be cut, what should you focus on. So you start off and say, okay, tell me, what percentage of revenues these product lines form, right? And you see these numbers. What strikes out to you? What would you do with these numbers on a first look? Louder? Yeah. Get rid of the lowest one. Why would you get rid of the lowest one? What about its potential? Right? Okay, good. So you want to look at profit margin. What else do you want to look at? Sales growth. Thank you. You want to take a look at how that category has been growing, right? So let's say you see these two numbers. These two numbers strike you as high. It's a large percentage of the current revenues of the company. What is the market share in that segment for that product? Right? Now what strikes you here? What is 92%? Okay, this endocrine product is 42% of revenues, but it's already got 92% of market share in the category. It's limited it's limited in terms of its growth, right? And look at this one, 7% for the ointment, right? So you're gathering data, you've taken a look at these two categories, then you say, look at this, the analgesic is just 1% share of the market. You say, what is the growth? Who mentioned growth here? You say growth there? Yeah. What is the segment growth? Okay. Looking at it isolated will give you one picture. Take a look at this growth. It's small percentage of revenues for ointments, small market share. 25 to 35% growth. You're starting to get a bigger picture. We continue and look for more categories. What is the profitability, the current profitability of these products, right? It's negative for the analgesic one that had a high percentage of revenues, right? And then what is the cost as a percentage of price? You see this number 60%, and there's an issue as you probe it further, that there was a patent that expired there, right? So you're losing on the margins for this product. So what does all this mean? You actually gone through 5 different categories of analyses, of looking at the data. What does this all mean? Preliminary recommendations, which is what you should think about in a case. From what I have seen, you put a stake in the ground and you say, this is my early hypothesis. You know? I would discontinue analgesic 1. I would focus on these 2, and because of the reasons that we saw. But going forward, what are some of the criteria I need to think about? Do we have the marketing capabilities to develop these products? Do we have a sales force, right? And that for the other lines, you continue them. So you talk about the rest of this case too. You continue them if there is positive NPV. This is not what is expected. This is a great answer. If you came to any of this, it's also, you pass. People need to know in the interview, can this person do the job? Not has he or she taken it to the nth level, right? Do you get it? So if you feel this is looking like a lot, don't worry. But can you follow along the logic? And can you lay out a good portion of it? So brain teasers and oddballs. Why is a manhole cover round? You guys heard this question before. Some of you might have. There's actually 5 or 6 reasons. I guessed one of them. And yes. Yeah, if they were rectangular or if they were triangular, if you twist, no, triangle wouldn't go in, but if they were rectangular or square, they could go in diagonally. What is another reason that manhole covers are round? They would? You can roll them. Good. Okay? You can roll the round ones. Yes, back? Correct. And the converse of that? Yeah. For a given perimeter, the circle covers the largest area. And also, a circular tube, can be made the lightest. And because of that, when cars go over manholes, if it was heavier, the suction would raise it up. Not that you're expected to know that. But the fact that it wouldn't fall in. Okay? This could be, if you're relaxed and if you're not under pressure, you can start thinking, you can visualize. The thing that really helps me is when a client talks about a situation, I visualize it. If they say you're in the, you're making golf balls in a factory, I visualize that factory. I imagine things that are coming out. I imagine the technology that would be in this space. When I think of a manhole, I think about where they are. And that's the best you can do is transport yourself there so you can visualize it, right? What is a good R squared? Now, if people know that you're a finance or a math major, you should revise on the things in your field that are critical, right? If you're a psychology major, you should know some of the major psychologists. Because you also want, if you majored in something, you better know something about it, right? At a very high level. If you're a finance major, if someone says, what is a CAPM? You should have a 2-line answer, right? But if you're not a finance major, you generally won't get questions. Even R squared, you generally won't get it unless you had a quantitative major, because it is assumed that consulting firms will train you. But what you've done, you should have done thoroughly, right? So, yeah. This is also from your lovely site. Yeah. Correct. Yeah, usually this is given when you have longer cases. You cover a big industry analysis case, and then you say, let me ask you a few more. Sometimes how many gas stations in the US, like how many car tires in the US, you saw can take up to 20 minutes. But yeah, usually these are add-ons. They're not the case for the day for you. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So tips for unusual cases. maintain your cool. Use some kind of framework, ideally if it's analytical, and think your logic out loud. Yeah. And these are the facts, okay? So this is just a starting list, but you should know a few basic facts. I'll try to list a few of them. And just knowing this, like, about 60% of the people are employed in the US, 60% are married, there are 50 states. Sometimes knowing the states and breaking things down by states would help too. It's about 82% urban population in the US. The average income is about $45,000 per year. Income distribution, again, it depends on the region, but you have some idea at the education level. If you just know this, it's just a great starter versus asking for it. Now, you're not expected to know this, but it's a good starter. Right? Population, you should. World population, you should. Hopefully, you'll just take a look at the population by continent and have some idea too. Yeah, okay. And then please, yeah. Yeah, I think that there was a question that was asked earlier too, that it's really about your logic, and you might be way off in your numbers, but if you built up to that number through your logic, then it's completely fine. I mean, you're not supposed to be an encyclopedia on facts, but always you need to show a linear logical thinking in what you throw out there. Huh? So, and finally, research your firm. I mean, if you're going into interview with Monitor or Deloitte now, or Bridgespan Group or Dalberg, spend an hour on their website. I mean, this is just, you want to work at an organization, even though you might, you'll have classes and you apply to 16 firms and you got 4 interviews and you walk in there. But don't go in there without an hour on the website of that. Even though you feel you know a lot about BCG, it's just good to spend that time to see what's happening recently. What industries, if it's a smaller firm, do they serve? What are their functions? Who are the clients? Where does the work take place? If you know already that a firm has a culture of working at the office and meeting the clients as need be versus spending 4 days a week there, it's helpful. And if you don't, it kind of comes across. I mean, interviewers are, you generally have done this for a while, so they're going to be like Jack looking at you like, come on, you want to work here, but you haven't even done your research. Yeah, I love that one. There's a lot of good ones. And the final note, these are tools and suggestions. It's a starting point. If anything, I want to inspire you to just work harder because you just give it your 100%, and then whatever happens, let fate decide. And it's about content and delivery. I have a few of you going to be in the Arts of Communication class. It's not the only solution, but if you can actually get to practicing this, right? Just doing this again and again, it just becomes a part of your nature. Fit as important as case. Please work with the career office on fit questions. I might be working with some of you that have interviews going ahead with some of these firms on a one-on-one coaching basis, but the resources are there. Focus on delivery. And very importantly, when you get in there, this is what happens. This is one of my biggest problems when I started anchoring. You get there, you see the camera, millions of people are watching. You start elocuting. Hello and welcome. You're watching the 2008 Olympics. I'm Mihir, Mankad, blah, blah. There's it. And the mics capture your conversation. So have a conversation. Converse. Don't elocute. Because it's not natural. When you try to elocute, when you try to give an impression, it comes across. It's not natural. You need to have a conversation. You need to be able to look into the person's eyes. Just have a conversation. And put in a genuine effort, and just go there right before. I have this interview, I'll do 3 before, because that also, it all equates. Much will be left to luck, which you can control, so have a fun and healthy attitude. And one of my consultant friends put it this way, he's actually at Bain, it's one of his best words. If you ain't having fun, you're probably not doing right in the job, in the process. As long as you got your suit and tie or dress, just go out. Enjoy the process and knock him dead. Okay? Thank you. And questions, general? Yeah, back there. Let's keep it. Can you be a little louder so people can hear you? Yeah, it's one of the things I felt is that it's a very fair industry because it's all about people and you're constantly interacting with your team. So what you put in is seen in a very fair manner. Sometimes you just don't, a lot of the variation comes, you just don't get along with your manager for whatever reason. It's personality conflict, but that you can control. But the good thing is you get feedback along the way all the time. So there's, feedback is a part of every organization that I've worked with, and then also the ones that I know. Every 3 months, you will get feedback generally along 3 criteria. One is value addition. That's the actual consulting, your analysis, how you frame your decks. 2 is team. So how you get along with the team, how you synergize the team. And 3, and this happens when you have more experience, is client interaction. So you're judged on these 3 criteria, and you will know where you stand, but the culture is generally also what they call open, honest, direct communication. So it's much better than other industries. Other questions? Yeah.
So during a case interview, we have talked about all this, but if you let's say at probably the second half of the part, and you realize that you made some mistake or you missed some important points, like in your former part, do you go back to it, or you just what's the best?
This, and a part of that is actually a really good question, one that I thought, okay, so one is if you feel you made a mistake in the past, right, what should you do? Like about 2 minutes ago, you made an assumption when you think about it. That doesn't feel right. What should you do?
Correct yourself.
Yeah? There's a little bit of a judgment call there, if it was way back. But yeah, saying, you know what? I know a couple minutes ago I mentioned that my assumption for Facebook users in Africa would be 12%. But thinking about it, I would like to revise that number because of factor A and B, and let me continue. Just interviews, again, about open, honest, direct communication. If you had that thought, if you had many thoughts, pick your battles about which one you want to lay out. But if there's an important thought, go back to it. And a similar question, what happens if you freeze? And someone asks you a question, why are manhole covers round? And you're like, you can't start talking. What should you do? What should you do when you freeze?
You say, let me think about this for a minute.
Yes. Can you say that louder, please?
You say, let me think about this for a moment, please.
You say, if you really like frozen, you say, I'm sorry, I just need a minute to gather my thoughts. And take that 60 seconds. Can I have just a little bit of time? You can say, no, I'm sorry, I just need a little bit of time. Say it. Versus saying something for the sake of saying. And you don't need to fill in all the white space. There can be white space, but this is beyond white space. I need some time. And the interviewer, remember the interviewer is someone like you a few years ago. They don't enjoy tormenting you or seeing you fail, right? They would feel empathy. They want to help you. They understand the situation and see them that way versus someone in a suit from an organization that wants to find a flaw. Other questions? Yeah. Loud, please.
How do you say when you say what is your strength, weakness? The strength is something.
Okay, so the question is how would you phrase strengths and weaknesses, right? So strengths could be any of these criteria, my ability to work with people. But when you give a strength or a weakness, when you make a statement, lay it out. If you're giving 3 strengths, say analytical skills, leadership skills, the ability to think on the spot, lay it out, then give you give an example or a few subpoints to it, and then say it again, right?
In such a way that you are not really too boastful.
Well, when someone's asked you a question, tell me your strengths, you're answering a question, right? You're not. The other thing is, yes, it's also related points. Sometimes I've seen it where there's a spike, like someone's been part of some major achievement, and it's there on the resume usually. But they try to bring it. So don't listen to the question. If it doesn't come up, there's a time for if someone says, walk me through your highlights, tell me about this. Usually the interviewer has read your resume, but don't throw things out just for them to be noticed. I think you'll be hurting yourself. But when someone asks, what is your strengths, give them your strengths. Actually, more people find it difficult to list their strengths than their weaknesses. Yeah.
Can you give some examples of good weaknesses? Because I can only think of such that I really wouldn't want to admit to it.
Okay, a good question. Do we have some volunteers for a weakness? What could be a good weakness, an honest weakness? Thank you.
I tend to make small mistakes. I try to work very carefully and very separated and be very organized, but I make small mistakes and I can't help it. The way I try to help it is that I try to go over what I just did and try to catch them then.
Great. Okay. So one is, but you know what? Give it a little bit. Let that weakness sit, right? I tend to make small mistakes. Let it sit so that you're not immediately But if it's a real weakness, it's impossible for you to change it overnight. But the second part of it could be, I recognize that it's a weakness, and this is how I'm trying to overcome it, right? While I enjoy thinking about the big picture, sometimes I miss out on details. Let that sit. So you laid it out, okay? And I recognize this is a weakness, but over the years, I've tried to work at it in this way, right? What is another example of a weakness? Yeah. Yes, yeah. Okay, that's a good example too. Now, this is an important one for consulting, but again, even if you say that in a genuine way, the person will not put an X against you. You're being honest, and you're trying to work on something. I mean, you're in the school. You've obviously done a lot of things that are right. You earned the interview. You're just laying out. You're recognizing that you need to work on certain areas. Do you have a weakness? Yeah?
I was just going to say, aren't there some weaknesses that were kind of good for the industry or the type of person that might be good in consulting, communications, for example?
Yeah, this is my philosophy, is that eventually, don't say anything for the sake of what would fit in the industry. You've got to, even if you get the job, if you're not a good fit, it's not a good thing for you anyway. So just lay yourself out. Think really about, because they're asking you, what is a weakness? Can you be honest? Can you be introspective? Lay out something that you believe is a weakness versus what would look and consult. That's just my suggestion. Huh? Yeah.
How about the one where it's, I'm too hard on myself, so if something goes wrong, whether it's technical or not, it's hard for me to just get past that, accept it, and move on.
Yeah. It's nicely put. Try to be sharp and concise too. You made the point. Yeah.
I get stuck on the point where and I will be worried about them, so I need somebody to tell me.
Okay, good. Last example there. Now, when you're giving this, remember the interviewer is going through 10, 12 people in a day, right? And there's 7, 8 questions, there's cases, that. So if you can give a headline, you gave a few sentences, what is this category of a weakness? So that sticks, that's always helpful. But again, if you just practice this with your friend 4 or 5 times, the 5th time you say it, it'll be so much better. But try and also have what is the headline for this? Small mistakes, hard on myself. Yeah? Other questions? Yeah?
I just have an example which I used, and I wanted to see what you think about it. Sometimes I have a hard time finding a tie that fits my shirt.
You mean you would list that as a weakness?
You cannot make decisions on pressure, that's what you're telling me.
There's moments to be funny and just to be creative, and you can sense the rapport with your interviewer. You just have to, like anything in a dynamic, you just have to see if that will work well. But so that's my thought. That just it'll definitely, it could be a good icebreaker. It could lighten the moment, but with the right type of person. Okay? Technically, that's not a weakness. It's something that you want to. And a lot of times, well, is it a weakness? Many consulting firms these days rarely, they don't, suit and ties is much more the exception than the norm. But still, I see where you're going with that, but gauge the situation. Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
You worked in a number of top consulting firms, and I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about your background and how you made the decision to work at one and transition to another.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I started off, actually I did a summer with BCG in San Francisco, and I really enjoyed the office. It was really, BCG, really takes care of their people. I had a lovely summer. I decided to go to Bain because they were starting a nonprofit consulting group full-time after my summer, and they had a private equity group at that time, so it was a very close decision. I had an offer to come back after the summer with BCG, and then I was looking at Bain, so I went to Bain to San Francisco. After Bain, after my stints, I've gone and done different things, so I wanted to get away from this world, and I found a nonprofit organization in San Francisco that served people with developmental disabilities, and they were looking for someone to do a 10-week strategic planning project. So I took an externship from Bain to do this project, and they had just lost their 90-plus-year-old founder, and they were at this brink of bankruptcy. They served 2,000 people with disabilities. So I did that project for the board, and the board created a position because they needed someone to implement the strategic plan and help, fill the leadership void to some extent. And I remember it was exactly half the salary, but I just felt it was a good cause. So I went to Bain, and then after Bain, I moved to India. And in India, Bain did not have an office then. So I worked with McKinsey just because, again, I had to pay off some debt and try and get some more exposure. But I tried to focus on more government work and public sector work. Unfortunately, the economy was doing so well that work was getting cut, and there was a lot of for-profit clients. So that's how all three firms happened. When people ask about the differences between them, I find many more similarities than differences. I forget which conference calls I did from which firm. People are very smart and engaged, but I remember this one conference call. It was a global call. I won't name the firm, but it was like 12 people from different countries. We were all discussing an industry practice area, and then suddenly there was a sound that was getting louder, and it was someone in one of the countries started to snore. And then we were increasingly becoming silent, and then everyone else was silent. You could actually hear the snoring, and then we all burst out laughing. And so the point is, it's fun, engaging work, but it's also tiring and can be. But I forget what firm was that. So that's how I moved around.
So building on that somewhat, coming from Fletcher, we're kind of different in that we're not MBAs, but some of us have developed a lot of business skills, and we all have interest in international work. Do you think that there's a consulting firm that the Fletcher type would fit in particularly well? And how do you think we can best sell them?
Sure. I mean, okay, so one is I don't necessarily want to advocate one firm or the other, but I know, for example, McKinsey in Washington, D.C. has more of a development and a nonprofit practice. Britspan Group that came out of Bain is also focused on nonprofits. But this is the dilemma I faced myself when I was thinking of transitioning to Britspan, is that the projects that you will do with an organization like Britspan, if you care about nonprofits, will be the projects that can be afforded, right? So it'll be for a museum or an art society. It rarely will be kind of getting into the trenches of programs and helping organizations such as RCH. So if you want to have a good salary while you get your skills and still work for worthy clients, it's worth it, but then it's a trade-off in terms of what drives you. Do you rather just go to this, to what the firm or organization is good at, get those skills, and then move fully into another world? Do you try and blend? When I was at McKinsey too, I was really pushing for getting a nonprofit major, if you will, and they said that it can never be your major at that time. Now in DC, there are a few people who do, but mainly at the senior level, who do only this type of work. They said that it can be your minor, so that was something that I had to think about too. But I think there's new firms like Dalberg and a whole bunch of others that if you just research yourself, there might be a good niche. My sister-in-law worked at Deloitte, and she worked with city governments and clients that she really enjoyed, even though it was a for-profit consulting firm. So a lot of it is research and see where you fit. But think about just going in for a couple of years to get the skills, and then you have the rest of your life to directly make change. the same thing I felt with the Clinton Foundation, the HIV/AIDS initiative. It was better to dive there than do a project with one of the consulting firms that was doing it. Last couple of questions, then I think we'll break for last one or two. Yes, Dries.
In terms of resources one should expect to put into preparation for
Mm-hmm.
what would be your estimate? What amount of time we are talking about?
Yeah.
10 hours, 100 hours?
Yeah, I mentioned this at the very beginning. We said that on average it's about 50 cases. It's a lot, but maybe 50 hours if you're really serious about it. 50 hours is about a week's time for something that you could do for, many years. And also remember, this is a chicken and egg thing. The reason why a lot of MBAs get jobs in this industry, one is because, they have a slightly, they have a better course match, right? But then they're also exposed to, in all their classes at HBS, 50% of the class participation grade is just your communication, laying this out, what you look for in cases. And if you're coming from a different background, there's an onus on you to put more effort. I think it equates in terms of a lot of applicants coming from MBA and you have so many people and fewer, from unconventional areas. So I think if you're at the same bar, you should get that same opportunity. But if you worked a third or a fourth as much as people from the other schools, then it just doesn't add up. So I strongly believe that the numbers can increase from places like Fletcher and the Kennedy School. But if you've not put in that effort, then you're not going to get there. So if anything, you should think about that as a minimum bar. 30, 40, 50 cases touching on these 6 areas would be helpful if you have an interview coming up. Or even if you don't, it's just something nice to explore, even if you're not planning to get in there, but just spend a little bit of time because it's a really nice side effect skill set that comes out of management consulting, and it helps you in whichever fields you work in. Last question, go ahead.
So I just want a quick question to you, because there are a lot of materials to do case interviews and in preparation. Do you have a recommendation about what we should look at?
I don't have a recommendation on a book. I mean, there's certain books. You'll see Cosentino's book is popular. There's, if you just type case study, practice on Google, there's a whole bunch of resources. I think these days it's not, previously you had to buy the physical book. These days getting examples of cases is not difficult. If you look at the ones here, there's many of them, and you can just ask, that question to your partner. So it's what you find on the internet. But the thing is that rather than doing it perfectly and finding the right resource, it's just starting to do it today. Just do a case, do these questions, just go out and get it. But there's a lot of resources readily available.
Can I just interject and say that the consulting club on Trump has a lot of good resources. As case in point by Mark Constantino, the library has that. We have some resources from Victor Chang that are a part of. You'll find them on the FCC. They're part of the career field guides.
Okay.
So there are a number of resources.
Victor Chang and I actually went for we were together in college in our senior year, and we were sitting on a plane going up to an interview with LEK. And then all these years later, I called him saying, you're in this case. So he's done a lot of work. He's a McKinsey consultant, and he's got his own website, and he has a lot of good tips in there. So that's another resource. But I will continue to be a resource here. I'm really looking forward to my course starts in a couple of weeks, so I'll be spending a lot more time here. And I think the career office is said to separate like case study help with work on the class, but as a general resource to occasionally I'd be happy to help you. If you do have an interview, then I think we've commissioned some time for me to actually do one-on-one coaching with you all. But I'm excited about both teaching here and for some of you to find the right fit in consulting for whatever amount of time. So thank you for today.